welcome to the Flicks Forum podcast, where each episode we go back and we look at a Netflix original film in the order of release. Today, we've got Netflix 118th film. It's the 2018 American-French experimental film, The Other Side of the Wind. It's directed by Orson Welles, stars John Huston, Bob Random, Peter Bogdanovich, Susan Strasberg, and Oja Kodar. I am Jesse, and I'm joined with MJ. How are you?
I'm very well. It's pretty cool doing an Orson Welles movie, knowing that we set up this podcast to do Netflix original films, and we're currently up to the 2018 releases, and we're doing an Orson Welles film.
Who would have thought that, if we had started back at the start, that you'd be able to say, look, we've done an Orson Welles film as a Netflix original. Crazy.
You kind of have to shift your mind a little bit as well, because one thing that we don't have to really discuss is the fact that all these films were filmed today, more or less, and it throws a little bit of a spanner in the way that we approach it. So it's been quite refreshing. I feel 118 films. I've just been taken out of my little comfort zone that I built for myself for this one.
That's a really good point that you make too. Like, the footage from this is 99.9% from the 70s. So a lot of context behind the narrative and bits and pieces that you probably visually see on the screen throughout that, might not be as kosher today when we talk about some scenes and things probably, but really good context behind this. And I guess that's a good call out to spoilers. So if you want to watch this one, give us a pause and come back later, because we're going to jump into quite a bit about this one very shortly.
Yep, good call.
Fast Flicks time. This is where we quickly give our own little summary of what we think. So what have you got for us, MJ?
Yeah, this is, again, another different sort of Fast Flicks. But look, the story follows an old school Hollywood director who's throwing a screening party for his unfinished film for the cast, the crew, and the media, as he works through with his entourage to navigate potential issues with the production throughout this boozy affair.
Good. Yeah. I've gone exactly the same film, but I've gone the movie within the movie side of things, I guess, is the way I'm putting it. So like realistically, it's two movies. It's a film which is made by a documentary cameraman, which is the story of the director's last day of life. And then you've also got the director who's making the film, which is broken down because of this lack of funds. So I guess that's the two films within the one film.
It's a good call out.
It's an interesting way of looking at it, I guess, but I like yours as well. They're both good, different ways of looking at it. Yeah,
for sure.
So, what can you tell us about the background of this one? What's some history or development or pre-production? This has got a long checkered history.
Yeah, I mean, this is insane, right? And I'll try and keep it brief for this point, but there'll certainly be things we want to pick out and talk to. But in a nutshell, I don't know if you can do this in a nutshell, shooting for this film began in 1970 for what Orson Welles intended to be his own Hollywood comeback. And that production basically resumed on and off until 1976. So as far as we could tell, Welles continued to intermittently work on this project into the 80s, but it became embroiled in legal, financial, political complications, which prevented the film from ever being completed. So Orson Welles passed away in 1985. And by that point, the filming was completed and several attempts were made at trying to reconstruct this unfinished film. And then that didn't work. So flash forward to 2014, and the rights for this production were acquired by Royal Road, and the project was overseen by Peter Bogdanovich, as you mentioned in the cast, and producer Frank Marshall. So The Other Side of the Wind, which is this film, had its world premiere at the 75th Venice International Film Festival on the 31st of August, 2018. It was then released on November 2, 2018 by Netflix, and it was also accompanied by a documentary called They'll Love Me When I'm Dead, which is to do with the making of this film. And probably the main thing is that it holds the record for the longest production time in history at 48 years. So I've spoken about that for about 45 to 60 seconds, but we're talking about a 48-year production story. So there's probably a whole bunch of things that you might want to pull out from that to talk through.
Yeah, I think you've done a really good job of simplifying it as best as possible for our audience, because there is so much that we could discuss and talk about this one. And I guess I watched. I don't know if you did. Did you watch the Love Me When I'm Dead doco?
I didn't. I had every intention of doing it, but I didn't. And I'm glad that you did, because I'm keen to pick your brain on it.
Yeah, I think it probably gives a lot more background into I guess, all the things that you've said, and all the little bits and pieces about, specifics about the film, and and there's also Netflix did another 38-minute short as well that they released. It's not actually on Netflix in Australia, which I found a little bit confusing, but it is a Netflix short film called A Final Cut for Orson, and it sort of takes what's in They'll Love Me When I'm Dead and expands a little bit further, more about the nitty gritty sides of the production thing. So, how a majority of the audio was shot, and the processes that they went to try and extract the audio of the files that they did have, and then getting in family members to do dubs and extra audio. It's just such an incredible story about how this was put together. But I highly recommend giving it a squiz if you can. And they speak to most of the surviving people that are still alive that feature in this film. So it's quite a good bunch of interviews with, in particular, Peter Bogdanovich, who had a big part in sort of getting this resurrected and making sure that it was able to be seen. Because, as you mentioned before, you've got these legal issues that, there was because of the Iranian Revolution, and the finance came from some of the family there, so it ended up being locked in these vaults in France for so many years without being able to be touched. And then the French legal system sort of classified and said these, the director isn't the owner of the work, the producer is, and the trust of Orson Welles had a say in it as well. So it's just an incredible effort to get all these people eventually to come together, work on this together, and say, yes, let's get a vision of this out so people can actually see it, which I think is a really, really good thing about this story. Have you got? I've got heaps of other stuff we could talk about, but I don't know whether you want to.
Look, if it's whatever you think is going to be relevant to this conversation and to our listeners, to be honest, Jesse. But do you get the impression that Netflix venturing into this deal had a lot to do with the fact that there needed to be an accompanying documentary? Do you think they basically said, we'll fund what you need for the completion of this film, but you need to provide us with a doco that we can bring to it as well?
That's a pretty fair point, because the doco is so interesting, and I think Netflix 2018 sort of stage, we're hitting that stage where they're starting to get, the next couple of episodes we're going to hit some big films. This is where Netflix are starting to take their features quite seriously. But yeah, I agree with what you're saying. I think that this stage was where they're having some pretty good successes with docos as well. And I mean, the appeal of having a doco on this would be a good thing for Netflix to say, we want that, because if we're going to give you the money for the film, we want that as well. And there's some famous people that had tried previously to sort of crowdfund it, like Wes Anderson's and Noah Baumbach's, and they just couldn't get the funding, I guess, that we know that Netflix is able to provide, and the amount of debt that they're in and stuff. This is why, because they do things like this that probably would never have been able to be done without their finances.
It's a good point too, and it's the perfect platform to be able to release that in conjunction with this movie that's been heavily talked about and heavily scrutinized for its production, and then to release that with a documentary. If a bigger studio did this, they don't have that platform. Well, you know what, in 2020, 2021, maybe some of them do, but Netflix at the time was the only one that had the perfect platform to release them both at the same time. You're not going to have these both released in a cinema at the same time and have any sort of success. So you think without something like Netflix, or without the building up of streaming and the normal use of people streaming, this probably doesn't actually happen. So it's pretty fascinating.
And the struggle that Wells had, and this was in bits and pieces of the docos that accompany this, like, he was a desperate man to get this out. Like, this piece of work was at the AFI Awards, where he was given this Life Achievement Award, and they have this footage I can't remember which one of the docos it was, but they have the footage of him getting up on stage saying, thank you for this award, pretty condescending to the audience that's there, and goes, hey, Thank you for the award, but I'm going to show you some footage of my new film because you didn't have anyone backing it at stage, and you needed a distributor. So it's one of the weirdest things you'll ever see. It's just this crazy thing that sort of goes in behind. This film is such an analogy for exactly what was happening in Wells's life, like you mentioned at the start, which it's just so uncanny.
It's the story that he wanted told.
Yeah. All right. Well, I've got other stuff, but I reckon we should probably keep moving and look into the consensus for this one. What were the critics and people saying?
Yeah, this is it's a 6.8 out of 10 on IMDb. That's over 6,000 ratings. Pretty small, to be honest. Considering the punch that it does have behind it, I would have expected the 6,000 ratings to be higher, but 6.8 out of 10 is a great score. And on Letterboxd, there's actually double the amount of ratings on Letterboxd, and that really shows you how much this film is pegged towards your more film lovers and I guess historians of cinema as well in that sense. But it's a 3.7 out of 5 on Letterboxd, so still really, really good scores from those general sort of formats, and people like this film from what I can tell there.
Yeah, the Google users had it about 77%, so very similar there. And Rotten Tomatoes had it at 84 on nearly 100 reviews, so certified fresh. Audience had it a lot lower, though, 58% on 330 odd. So, yeah, big. There's a multitude of differences there, I guess, across what people are thinking.
Yeah, I reckon Netflix would have liked a few more eyeballs on it, to be honest.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, yeah, I agree. Did you want to go into your early thoughts this one?
Yeah, I will. Look, I almost have to say that I feel a little bit ill-equipped to pass judgment on this film. Like not being a proper Orson Welles connoisseur or having enough history on his work and his life, because I feel that so much of this film and so much that's reflected in this film has obvious parallels between himself and Hannaford in the film. So you obviously have his innate knowledge of the industry, the truth, the lies, the hanger-oners, the politics, the legacy. There's so much more to this film than meets the eye. And one viewing with what I'm going to call myself a bit of a shoddy education on the topic of Orson Welles leaves me more intrigued than fulfilled from watching this film. But I liked it. As I said, more hanging on with intrigue than anything else. Like the insight into Hollywood at this time was fascinating. And I think this would probably offer a lot from a rewatch.
Yeah, you put it really well. I think that I couldn't agree more. The first word I wrote down, and I kept coming back to this throughout, was hectic in capital letters. This film was hectic. It was a minefield. It was there was so much in this to dissect, to look at. But I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it, and I haven't been this impressed with a Netflix film for a long time, I think. And I'm not sure whether this is, and like you mentioned, like this was filmed over 6 years, and just the stories of being able to keep that cast together over that amount of time, replace people, film the whole thing without your main protagonist, most of the time, like Wells stepped in to play the main, like just the background behind the ability to put this together, have such a reflection on certain parts of his own life, even though he closely said, I don't think I want to see this as my last sort of film, but I agree with you. This is something that I probably need to watch 3 or 4 more times to have a proper opinion on this, because there's just so much to take in.
Yeah, and truly understand the history of him and his work and his philosophies, because it's all in there. You just got to unpack it.
All right, time to talk about some characters.
Yeah, I think there's a lot there, but I think it's probably best to start with Jake Hannaford, played by John Huston, and the idea that this man is more than anything else, he's a creator, and he likes to let things play out and work with it on the fly to some extent. He never looks too far ahead. He's not a great planner. He surrounds himself with people to keep it in check. Whether they actually do or not is another question. But you get the feeling throughout all this, he's not particularly close with anyone. The art in him rules his life, and then you combine that with the booze and the partying, and that lifestyle seems to trump any sort of desire that he has to truly connect with people. which is obviously a commentary and criticism of what was happening in Hollywood or in the film industry at the time.
Yeah, I think all really, really good things that you bring up, because I mean, if you're looking at this as a reflection of Wells's life, you'd almost say this is him, the person that's been in exile, having to make films in Europe and coming back to America, and this is that, his first film back. And yeah, I don't really have an awful lot more to add to what you're saying, because I think that closeness that you speak about with him, that is almost mystical throughout the first stage of the film. You saw this person that you referenced so many times, and it is a while before you meet him. But yeah, he's got that aura that everyone wants to know him, everyone wants a piece of him, but at the same time, does he actually have that piece in return of anyone? And that adds to that idea you're speaking about, that those connections are probably lacking a little bit.
Yeah, it's a great point. People talk about him more than he actually talks about himself.
Yeah, definitely. You only draw these little bits and pieces throughout about his background and what he's like, and I get these slow reveals of the inside of who he could possibly be, and why things are reflected in his work, because that's what a majority of white people know. It's about his work, not necessarily about him.
Not who he is.
Yeah. I had I think she was classified as the actress on the online sites, played by Oja Kodar, called Pocahontas throughout the film and things like that, and Wells's real life girlfriend at that time, also co-writer of this film as well. And I just wanted to highlight that no dialogue of this character, which I think was important, because this was the only character that brought, and at the start I spoke about these being two films in one, or two movies in one, and I think it was important that she was the only person that brought the two stories together. She was the only one that had that connection or that commonality between the fictional film that's on the screen and this real life party that's happening. So it was just nice to have that connection in that story. Without her, probably would have been missing a little bit. So that was what I saw her as.
What's interesting about her is that she's the star of this film. The film within a film, and watching it, she feels like a fully fledged movie star. She has that presence about her on screen, but not once outside of that does she ever feel like she's a star. Like at the party, she blends in as much, if not more, than anybody else, which is, I kind of take that almost as a reflection on the way women were treated in the industry at the time. And here's this woman that I'm watching this film within a film, finally seeing her in real life at this party and gravitating towards her, whereas no one else is. And as you said, she doesn't even have a line of dialogue. Obviously, the film within a film is a different story, but even in the party, we don't even hear her talk. She's nothing, even though to me she's a star.
Yeah, and I also like that. Was it John Dale, the leading man in this film? He didn't have any dialogue either, so I think that was a really good good symmetry in that film within the film. That if he had a couple of lines, it would have completely thrown that whole understanding of her character. So I thought that was nice.
Yeah.
Who have you got next?
Brooks Otterlake, played by Peter Bogdanovich, and he's the cocky and he's the charismatic one. His relationship to Jake is really interesting. He appears to idolize the man, like he basically owes everything to him, and he's quietly insecure despite his public bravado, which might be more of a facade than what the man truly is. And I kind of like that we do get a slight insight into his insecurities closer to the end. But there's that cockiness to him really stands out, and this is Mr. Hollywood. Everything's going fine. I can do anything I want, but underneath the water, he's paddling hard and trying to keep afloat.
Yeah, just that. I think I enjoyed that. He's like these starry-eyed thoughts towards Hannaford from the start, and then you sort of see this slowly disintegrate throughout towards the end, where you've got this climax where that relationship's sort of untenable now. And I enjoyed him probably most as a character throughout this film.
He feels somewhat relatable, doesn't he? In a weird way.
Yeah, in a very weird way.
Because I'm certainly not living my life like he is.
I've got Julie Rich down here as well, who's the critic, I guess. And I just thought, like, it was just like she seemed to enjoy annoying Hannaford at every chance that she had, and this reflects closely with Wells' sort of relationship that he had um, with a public feud with an actual lady in real life called Pauline, who was writing this essay, and it was a controversial essay, and she claimed that he didn't actually write Citizen Kane. So that's just a reflection of this real life person that Wells was having an issue with in real life. He sort of tried to have the same sort of character on screen, which was interesting.
Wasn't Pauline Kael, was it?
Yeah, Pauline Kael, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, look, to me, the Julie Rich character, she was probably one of the only characters who appeared to escape this moth caught in a flame psyche of this whole crowd at this party. She could actually see the gaps and the holes that were existing. She knew that there was something that wasn't right about the production, about the whole John Dale saga. She kept the film, and when I say film, I mean the other side of the wind film. She kept the film somewhat grounded, and she was a little bit of explicit commentary on what was going wrong in this picture. And that felt kind of real as well. Like we talked about Otter Lake being relatable. She was relatable in the sense that I felt like she wasn't in the crowd, and she was the one that was trying to highlight the problems with it.
Yeah. Who else have you got?
I've got Billy Boyle, who was played by Norman Foster, and I actually felt like he was quite a tragic character, like just the yes man, really, more than anything else. And he never quite seems to quite understand the big picture, but he'll do what he's told to help the team. And then you kind of get into it, and you wonder, does anybody actually care about him? Doesn't seem like it, and it's kind of reflective of that whole crowd in general, and who actually or genuinely cares for one another in this whole scene. And he's a man that would do anything for you all, but as soon as he starts drinking, everyone's just like, whatever, I don't care that you're a recovering alcoholic, you should have a drink, sort of thing. It's kind of sad.
Yeah, they definitely played him as like as a stooge or a clown, and I think the commentary I liked on this was he was a former child actor, and it's almost like this reflection on child actors and how little support they get in the industry after they've had their 5 minutes of fame as a kid, and we can see that through so many different examples of young kids who star in these big features and then end up down and out. So yeah, I thought it was another interesting little piece to this huge puzzle, I guess, of this whole film.
Yeah, no, exactly. And look, the other, I do want to talk about John Dale. We touched him before, but it sort of begs the question, is he the only guy that kind of escaped the clutches of Hannaford? Like, he left before Hannaford had the chance to eat him up and spit him out like he does with everybody else. And that's kind of why Hannaford is so taken by the fact that Dale's gone. It's got nothing to do with the production. It's got nothing to do with the movie. It's the fact that I didn't get my chance to eat him up and spit him out.
Yeah, very, very good point. I've got some questions around their relationship for later on, I reckon, which might lead a little bit further into Dale's character, because yeah, very intriguing one.
I like the sound of that.
Yeah, the last one I had was the Zara character, who's that sort of old retired sort of lady that we got a few little flashbacks, and she's based on one of Wells's old friends, who he wanted to play the role but couldn't get her to play the role. And it was just interesting that all of those shots were shot in Europe while they were doing the rest of these shots in America. Just the magic of filmmaking at times. Just so
I
cool.
saw that too.
Yeah.
Just because she was in Europe, like, yeah. I find it interesting with Zara as a character because this was her place, right? Like, in effect, it was her party almost. But she still exists in the shadow of the power that Hannaford creates. And it's, yeah, I don't know. It's not if you really break this down, he hasn't got a lot of nice things to say about Hannaford, which is interesting because you could draw a lot of parallels between Hannaford and Wells. And is this an example of Wells being like, well, I might have achieved a lot in my life, but not a lot that I'm very proud of? I don't know. But there's just a lot to dissect here in every single piece.
Good. Any other characters?
No, not that are probably worth talking about. But again, if I watch it again, I'd probably find something else.
Something else. Yeah. Well, this is probably, we could talk briefly about Wells and his sort of previous works and things like that. Now, he's got 100. I know him from a lot of films in it where he's acting as well. So, he's done 130 roles that he's been a part of, 62 directing credits, 69 writing credits, produced 26 features, and 155 credits as playing himself, just in talk shows and things like that. I just thought it was really interesting that so much of this film reflects things that actually happened in his life, like the suicide of the father, not interested in making money from the features that he's making. That was another reflection. And then, struggling with the funding too. And that was a big part of this film, was the inability of his team to get the funds together for the rest, the rest of the money. And, I think that's why it took 6 years to make this film, because, they'd film for 10 days and they'd be like, okay, I've got to go act in this feature to get the cash to get to this film. Like, it's just crazy. It's so crazy.
But that's why he makes it really explicit that this is based on his life before admitting that this is not based on his life. Almost, it's kind of, he's really trying to mess with you. At the end of the day, this is still art, and everyone draws on their own experiences to create art. But then partly you want to watch this going, oh, this is autobiographical from Orson Welles, and this is what he's saying happened. And then he's literally saying this is not autobiographical. It's just, I guess you got to take out what you can out of it and whatever you think. And that's, again, that's the way of dissecting art.
Yes, exactly. Let's talk about some scenes. What are some ones that stood out for you?
Yeah, look, I probably don't have a lot here because, as you sort of mentioned at the start, it is hectic. It's hard to pick and choose and take things out of it. But I have to say, as a whole, I was really fascinated by the film within a film. I would have loved to have sat down and watched it. From the pieces that we saw, it was difficult to put it all together narratively and with any sort of flow on. But it certainly piqued my interest, probably more than anything else in the movie that we watched. So I was definitely fascinated by the film within a film. And then there was a line of dialogue which I think sums everything up perfectly, and we've probably spoken to it a little bit, but talking about Hannaford, and I can't remember who it was now that said it, but he said everything he creates he must destroy. He talks about the people being fireflies and those who are in his light. He chews them up whole, but he chews them really slowly. So it's kind of like, you can hang on as long as you want, and I'm still going to use you the way I want to use you. And when I'm done with you, you're gone. And it's just, it was such a great analogy. And as soon as I heard it, you just watch the whole film differently and you reflect on the whole film differently, because that's what this man's doing the whole time.
Yeah. 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 I just love listening to you retell that. That was really good. And I'm the same. Like, I think that the majority of things that I enjoyed were from the film in the film, because they're probably more of the cinematic style things that we saw.
True.
I thought the intro was quite impressive itself. Those short, quick little cuts to introduce what was going on, while there's this hectic voiceover of it was Otter Lake, wasn't it? Yeah, in the future, in the future as an old man, and that was actually Peter Bogdanovich who recorded that voiceover later, because Wells was going to record the audio but never did. So that's just another little side thing. I've read and watched so much on this film that there's little tidbits that come out as going. But I thought that was an impressive little intro. Some of these trippy scenes, like that nightclub scene, and then the bathroom, and sort of like each cubicle had a different sort of couple in there. And I just thought that was visually quite stunning, where you just get that occupied click on each of the doors as they go through. I thought that was a cool little look. I'm just going to say, I was going to say the car sex scene. That was something like I was not expecting, and I don't think I've seen anything like it, but it was done quite impressively. Yeah, just.
I agree. Like the intrigue that you get, like who's the bloke driving the car, and where does it all fit in, and why does he kick him out? Oh yeah, I want to watch that movie.
Yeah. And finally, that chase between Dale and the actress through that building site, just that editing was so cool that you didn't know who was chasing who. There was those cool shadowy sort of bars, so it looked like they were running towards each other, but they were running apart. That was just visually so impressive.
I'm glad that you've taken the time to break down that film within a film a little bit and talk about the technical feats of it, because it's almost like Orson Welles he's got this commentary on the industry, but he still wants to flex his directing chops where he can, and he's making basically a mockumentary almost, but it's it's got that documentary feel to it. So there's nothing too sexy or fun to really highlight what you can actually do with a camera and in an editing suite. But he still allows the part of this narrative to have a film within a film that he can be like, look at the skills I still got. I still want to show off what I've got, and it's pretty impressive.
Yes, good. Is there anything that you didn't like in this one?
To be honest, I found myself quite confused by the opening that you mentioned before, that description of Hannaford making this movie, and only because it was so close to what was happening with this reimagining of Wells's work, and I kind of wasn't too sure whether the movie was starting or this was still just a lingering introduction. And again, like if I watched it again, then I could watch that scene differently. But obviously there's a text on the screen at the start explaining how we got to this point with Orson Welles. And then we start talking about how, here's the director making it. I'm like, hang on, didn't I just read this? Like it just, I found it really sharp and abrupt. But again, that's just on me. I figured it out eventually.
Yeah, I think on a rewatch, you're right. It makes so much sense. But I just like the way that it distinguished. Like it was just like, it made me think straight away. I'm like, hang on, is this, like, this story is the same? Like it, yeah. I get what
that's what gets you, because it's the same story. So, and look, the only other thing, and I think this is deliberate, I just had a little bit of an issue figuring out where everyone fit in. You know, I wasn't quite sure who was media, who was part of the cast and crew, and I think that was deliberate because it was creating that hectic vibe that you spoke about. But it made it a little bit difficult to try and latch on to some characters, which I don't think he wanted me to anyway. So worth. And look, it's not a good thing or a bad thing, but I felt like watching this, I was continuously learning and figuring it all out and trying to stay on course because my intrigue was rife throughout the whole thing. So I was working pretty hard to stay with this one. And again, that's why I'd probably benefit again from a rewatch.
Yeah, I'm exactly the same. You have to work very, very hard to keep up with what's going on. And I'm sure there are parts that I didn't fully get or grasp, because there's times where you're just like, hang on, who are they again? And what relation do they have? And what side are they on? And what's their connection? And I think to me, it sort of started in that bus at the start with the mannequins, like the weird dolls. And I was like, hang on, what's going on here? Why is this guy getting told off? Why is he getting kicked off? And then they're intercutting between the screening room with the studio executive. And I'm like, I'm trying so hard to tie this together. I'm like, looking back, I get it now, but it's just like, and I think that's why I kept running out, hectic, what the hell is going on? So that's my only sort of little criticism too, is that.
And it would be less hectic if you watched it again, because now you kind of know the flow. Now you know what's happening. You can actually just sit back and take it in.
Yep, definitely. All right, well, what's this one trying to say? What are some themes or some ideas?
And to be honest, we've discussed a lot of this anyway, just the way we've been talking about characters and scenes and the meaning behind it all. But I think in general, there's a big idea about creation and perception and where all that sort of fits in. And with creation comes the idea of art and what is art. And we spoke before about Orson Welles' somewhat autobiographical story here, but then again, it is a piece of art which you're supposed to translate however you want to translate it. There's obviously it's not even really a criticism, more a discussion on the commercialization of film and the intrigue that he's gone through a lot of that in his career and was going through that whilst making this film, and the characters in this film are having that same issue. And then finally, there's this whole vibe of hedonism throughout the whole film and everyone living that lifestyle that let's keep living large and then till tomorrow comes and we'll live large again and who cares about our future kind of thing. It's just party, party, party.
Yeah, good. Yeah, the same sorts of things, like that mirror of his life almost, where, and this is throughout too, you've got this industry that's being taken over by this younger generation. You've got this old guy that has obviously been the center of the universe for a lot of these people, and you've got all these up and coming people that can be just as successful. So it's almost like this satire of Hollywood and the passing of this old Hollywood, and that final scene at the drive-in too. It's like, the drive-in was seen, the 70s. This is the death of cinema. Like, why aren't people dressing up nicely to come out on a Saturday night and have a night out when, they're going in the backseat of a car and making out with people. And you see this throughout this film too, sort of sexualization that often I haven't seen in a lot of the Wells films that I have seen. And to me, that was a big difference. And that's why probably that scene took me a bit, because from the films I have seen of his, I've only seen maybe 4 or 5, but that graphicness I don't think I'd seen. So yeah, big commentary there, and this overpowering media too. Everyone in this film selling each other out. They're all trying to make a buck for themselves or up themselves as best as they possibly can. And there's a bit of betrayal in these friendships and these relationships as well. And in particular, this idea of masculinity too, like the image of the phallus or the male genitals throughout. There's quite a few scenes where there's dolls with them, or there's lots of these visuals of it. And I guess that I like this take. I guess that this film is about a massive prick, and Jake is a prick, and that's this whole idea of this film. And I want to watch it again because I want to see, off the top of my head, I can think of 3 or 4 times where I saw this image of the male genitalia, and I reckon it'd be there throughout a bit more if I went back and again.
Yeah, that's not a bad take.
Oh, what did you take? What else did you take from this one?
Yeah, look, the main takeaway for me is that this film really was like no other. And I think a lot of that has to do with the story behind making it and the fact that it got released in 2018 and how it all came to be. But also with the idea that such a big personality in the film industry is almost like laying down his cards in his last piece of work to really highlight his issues that he had with the industry. And I think in general for me, I enjoy movies about Hollywood where you do get a bit of an insight into what it's all about. And this is basically Orson Welles' take on it from a lifetime doing it. And I guess you don't want to say it's just from a lifetime. He obviously took some time out, and that was his reflection on it during that time. And then he came back and said, well, this is a story I want to tell about it. But still fascinating.
Yeah, I'm just going to echo what we've already said, I guess, where, it's not necessarily the easiest watch. You have to concentrate. So I think for me, if you did want to give this a crack, you need to set aside some time to actually concentrate and think about it. But it's still pretty excellent.
Yeah, I had no idea what to expect when I pushed play. I had no idea. I heard that this film, I knew that there was an Orson Welles film that wasn't finished, that got finished and was now on Netflix, and that was all I knew. So I didn't realize I was going to have to work so hard.
Yeah, it's very, very similar. Did you jump onto IMDb to check anything out?
I didn't, because I think I was working too hard to cruise into it.
Yep, I'm the same. Question time. Do you have anything you wanted to ask?
I got one. It's kind of multi-pronged. How do you think this movie looks if it was set in 2020? And there's 2 schools of thought. One being, have things really changed with the idea of hedonism and with the idea of hanger-oners and entourages and people's yes man, all that kind of thing, but also the idea of the old cinema and the new cinema sort of coming together. Does it look any different in 2020 if this film's made?
It's a very good question. I think there's probably parts in the film that wouldn't fly just narrative-wise and character-wise with some of the dialogue and the derogatory comments in certain scenes towards one of the, I think it's Dale's old teacher. I think that scene was a little bit not kosher for today, but at the same time, I think that was also having a bit of commentary on Wells and Hollywood as well, that and maybe it needed to be in there and it could be in there today, just worded differently, because it is talking about this idea that, it shouldn't matter what sexuality you're into and those types of things. But I think you make a really good point that it'd be really hard to do this in a different way. I mean, maybe update the locations and the sets, but you could probably make exactly the same film trying to say the same messages.
Or maybe you could. That's the thing. And I wonder if, someone who has been around and been really successful in the industry is now looking back on everything and seeing it that way, and whether it's the exact same events happening or not, or whether it's just there's still a toxicness to this industry that we want to highlight. I don't know. You and I don't work in the industry where we observe it from afar, but I'd love it if Spielberg one day decided to do a similar kind of thing draw from his own experiences and do something like this. And he might see things very differently. But it's an interesting thought.
This leads on a little bit to what you're saying too. Obviously, 40 years since a lot of this footage was taken. Do you think the editors of this film should be put on as co-directors, because they are heavily influencing that 100 hours of footage to siphon through? If Orson Welles was still around, I'm sure he would more than likely made a completely different cut. Like the I guess the underlying narrative is going to be the same, but do you think that they had more of an influence in the final product because it was done in 2018?
Yeah, look, it's really hard to say without knowing the amount of direction that was within Orson Welles' notes and how much we knew. We don't know whether I don't know whether he storyboards or anything like that. But I think even so, a lot of editors these days probably do similar sort of work without as much call from the director, and they're not co-directors. But it's an interesting thought. It's a very different situation that you can't run something by the director.
Yeah, maybe co-director is not the right word, but some different sort of title that I don't know. I just felt like it was. Yes, it's an Orson Welles film, but it's such a long time ago that this was put together. That there's something that
a lot of hands touched it, and a lot of people made it what you saw on the screen. Yeah, it's a good
exactly.
point.
There you go. The other thing I wanted to ask you was, so we start off with the understanding that at the end of this party there's a car accident. Was the car accident a suicide because of how that night went for Jake, or he didn't get the funding for this film? At the end of that drive, and he tries to get Dale to come in the car. It's his final rejection from Dale. He's already been rejected on set. Dale's rejected him again. Is this a suicide, or was it an accident?
My thought, and it's obviously very much left up for interpretation, I think it's an accident, but they want to give you as much evidence as you can that it can be a suicide. But the Jake I know isn't interested in a lot of that sort of stuff, doesn't care, will continue to go with the flow. But you could definitely argue both sides. But I think it's an accident.
Yeah, like you said, I think with the amount of alcohol that he took that night, it could be interpreted either way. But and that dialogue at the end, that voiceover, I don't know, just sort of put this somber tone on it, that there's more to it than there was. So I don't know. I think could be either way.
Yeah, for sure.
Anything else? Thoughts or anything you want to bring up?
No, nothing from me, and no other questions.
Well, let's wrap this up, where we give it a rating out of 5 for an average between the two of us. So hit us off.
Look, I enjoyed this, probably more for the intrigue and fascination with where it was going and what I was taking in. On reflection, and this is compounded by the conversation we've just had, but there is just a lot more to take out of this than what's interesting on a surface level. I still think it felt a little bit thrown together, and you can feel the disjointedness from the fact that it was 48 years in production and had many, many hands across it. But still as intriguing and fascinating as I've seen in a long time. So it's 3.5 stars.
Nice. Yeah, I've mentioned all of these things throughout. I guess that I think it probably needs about 3 more watches before anything really. But I fell down this rabbit hole of this film, and I watched the feature length doco called "They'll Love Me When I'm Dead," which is also a Netflix original. I watched that Final Cut for Orson, which is a 40-minute another doco on it, and this further added to this intrigue of what I was already into, I guess. And I can't recommend this to everyone, but if you're keen to spend some time with this film and do a bit more research and rewatch and look back over it, I think there's quite a bit in there for you. And I'm going to give it 4.5.
Oh, I like it.
Yeah, I'm going to give it 4.5. So that gives us an average of 4. Which is,
what is nice with this podcast that we've committed ourselves to, and you and I are both, we love movies. That's why we do this. we are by no means experts, and we are by no means full connoisseurs of film history. And I love to spend time dipping back and forth with some classic films that everyone's seen that I haven't seen. And this podcast doesn't allow us to really do it, or doesn't allow us to do that, and doesn't allow us to have these sort of conversations. And this is one example where we do finally get a chance to dip our toe into the history of film a little bit, talk about a big time director, talk about the time that this film was made, I guess we could say. And it's a really fun experience to be able to do that, as opposed to talking about the latest rom-com that no one else wanted to pick up, so Netflix put on their platform. It's really cool.
Yeah, I agree with everything you're saying. I think that hopefully the next few episodes are going to give us a bit more of an opportunity to have some bigger and better stories with, Bird Box, I think, is coming up soon. Rome is coming up soon. All those types of films that we know stories of. Buster's very soon. Yeah. So, some big name directors with some big stories that we can probably go back into a bit more depth, like we have with this one.
Yeah, exactly. But no, it's just honestly, it was like I was preparing for a completely different podcast. It was so fascinating to do.
Good. Well, we have social media. We have Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Pop a question up every week, and this one you've already answered anyway, so it's a bit useless to ask you now. But do you think it plays like a fully realized movie? And you've mentioned that it felt a bit disjointed to you. So thank you for already answering my pre-prepared question.
It did a little bit, yeah. It did a little bit to me. And I think but it's hard when you're conscious of it too. Like when you know that what's happened for it to get here, and every time you feel like something's a little bit off, you're like, oh, that's why it's off. And maybe it's unfair, but it wasn't overly disjointed, but there was enough there for me to think that, was this supposed to be there? Was that supposed to fit here? Is that cut only there because you didn't have enough footage to show for the rest of that? I don't know. So there's a bit of that.
Good. All right. Well, we're back again next week. Another 2018 film. This one is a historical drama. And I haven't watched this one, but I know of this one, and it's called Outlaw King. It's directed by David Mackenzie, stars Chris Pine, Aaron Taylor-Johnson, Florence Pugh, Billy Hole, Sam Sprell, Tony Curran, Cullen Mulvey, James Cosmo, and Stephen Delane. Up and ready. I think I know one thing about this film, and I'm pretty sure it's that Chris Pine gets his junk out.
Well, I like the fact that we're not going directly back in. We're still going with a historical big movie. So we're jumping from Orson Welles and not going straight back to like the next Christmas movie. That there's very many Christmas movies coming around, which I can't wait for. But they're kind of easing us back into. They've gone with the big Orson Welles movie. Plus, hey, this is a bit of a historical epic, true story about something that you didn't know about in the 14th century. So I'm all right with that.
Good, and I'm looking forward to seeing Chris Pine's bits and pieces.
I'm glad you are. We saw enough in this film.
True, very true. Thank you, as usual. It's been a good one to chat about.
Absolutely. I would have been disappointed if I couldn't chat about this film with someone.
Good, and I'll see you next week.
See you then, mate.